What if the two women you see every single morning on your television screen, composed, polished, and seemingly perfect, were carrying stories so raw, so deeply human, that knowing them would completely change how you see them forever? Nancy Guthrie and Savannah Guthrie. Two names that feel familiar, almost like family. You've watched them laugh. You've watched them deliver breaking news. You've watched them hold it together when the world was falling apart on live television. But here's what nobody ever told you. Behind those smiles, behind that studio lighting, behind the carefully rehearsed confidence, there were moments of devastating loss, quiet battles, and choices that required a kind of courage most of us will never fully understand. And the connection between these two women, it's not what you think. It runs deeper than a shared last name, deeper than coincidence. And when you finally understand what truly binds their stories together, you will sit back and feel something shift inside you. Because this isn't just a story about television personalities. This is a story about grief and grace, about faith tested and faith found, about women who chose to keep going when everything in them was screaming to stop. So stay with us, because what comes next will genuinely leave you speechless, and maybe, just maybe, it will remind you of something deeply important about your own story too. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a Tuesday morning, the kind of morning where your coffee is still hot and the news is already on. There she is, Savannah Guthrie, sitting behind that familiar Today Show desk, warm eyes, easy laugh, talking to millions of people like she's talking to just one. She makes it look effortless, and for most of America, that effortlessness is simply who she is. But what if that ease was hard-won? What if every single morning she sat in that chair, she carried with her a weight the camera never caught? Now shift the frame slightly. Picture a different woman, Nancy Guthrie, not on a glittering television set, but sitting in a quiet room, surrounded by books, a cup of tea going cold beside her, writing words that would eventually reach hundreds of thousands of grieving people across the world. Nancy doesn't have a primetime audience, but the people who find her, they find her at the worst moments of their lives, and somehow she becomes exactly what they need. Two women, two completely different worlds. One carries a microphone and reaches millions with the news of the day. The other carries a pen and reaches the broken with the hope of tomorrow. And yet, when you lay their lives side by side, something extraordinary happens. The themes begin to echo. The pain begins to rhyme. The resilience looks almost identical. Savannah Guthrie was born in Tucson, Arizona, in 1971. She didn't grow up dreaming of television. She grew up dreaming of courtrooms. Law was her first love, sharp, structured, definitive. She earned her law degree, passed the bar, and built the beginning of a career in a world of arguments and evidence. But life had a different courtroom in mind for her, a bigger stage, a messier, more beautiful, more unpredictable one. Nancy Guthrie, born years earlier, also built her life around words, but hers were always pointed toward something spiritual, something searching. She married, she built a home, she laughed and planned, and hoped the way all of us do when we believe the future is simply waiting for us to arrive. She had no idea what was coming. None of us ever do. What makes these two women's stories so compelling isn't just what happened to them. It's how they responded. It's the choice made again and again, in the dark, when no one was watching, to keep going, to keep speaking, to keep showing up. Because that, ultimately, is the real story here. Not the headlines, not the accolades, the quiet, stubborn, breathtaking decision to remain. Let's start with Savannah. Because before the bright lights, before the Emmy, before the millions of morning viewers, there was a young woman who had no idea who she was supposed to become. She took the long road, law school, the bar exam, years of legal practice, and then, almost accidentally, she stumbled into journalism. She began as a legal correspondent, and something clicked, that same love of argument, of truth, of getting to the heart of a story translated perfectly to the camera. She was sharp. She was warm. She could ask the hardest questions without ever making people feel attacked. That's a rare gift, and it didn't go unnoticed. But here's what the highlight reel never shows you. While Savannah was climbing, she was also quietly wrestling. Relationships that didn't work, A personal life that felt always on hold while her professional life accelerated. She watched peers marry, start families, settle into something that looked like permanence. And she kept moving, kept working, kept believing that the life she wanted was still ahead of her. That kind of hope, sustained over years of quiet uncertainty, it cost something. It slowly, silently cost something. And then something happened that even she could not have anticipated. A health diagnosis that stopped her in her tracks and forced her to face a vulnerability she had never shown the world. But we'll get there. Because first, we need to understand what she was building and why losing any part of it would have been so devastating. Meanwhile, Nancy Guthrie was living what looked, from the outside, like a beautiful life. A loving marriage to David, a son named Matt, a faith community, a deep sense of purpose. And then she became pregnant again, and everything changed. Their daughter, Hope, was born in 1999. Within weeks, the doctors delivered news that shattered their world entirely. Hope had a rare metabolic disorder called Zellweger syndrome. There was no cure. Hope would not survive for 199 days. Nancy and David loved their daughter with absolutely everything they had. They held her, they sang to her, they prayed over her. And then Hope was gone. The grief that followed was the kind that doesn't have language, the kind that makes ordinary Tuesday mornings feel like a quiet insult. How do you go on? How do you wake up, make coffee, breathe in and breathe out, when the thing you loved most is simply gone? Nancy went looking for books that could help her grieve, books written by people who truly understood. And she found very little. So she made a decision, quiet, almost defiant, that would reshape the entire trajectory of her life. If the books she desperately needed didn't exist, she would write them. She would become the voice she had searched for and never found. That decision, born entirely out of grief, would eventually bring comfort to hundreds of thousands of broken people around the world. There's a particular kind of strength that only gets forged in loss. You can't manufacture it. You can't study for it. You either go through the fire and come out changed, or you don't come out at all. Nancy Guthrie went through the fire twice, because after Hope, after the grief and the writing and the slow, sacred rebuilding, Nancy and David discovered she was pregnant again. And the tests came back. This child, too, had Zellweger syndrome. Gabriel, he lived for 183 days. Another 183 days of fierce, deliberate, wide-open love. Another goodbye that broke them open in ways they hadn't thought possible even the first time. 2 children, 2 losses, the same rare, devastating disorder. The statistical impossibility of it made people shake their heads in disbelief. But for Nancy, this was never a statistic. This was her life, her body, her arms. And out of that second, almost unbearable loss, something remarkable quietly happened. Instead of collapsing inward, Nancy expanded outward. She wrote more. She spoke more. She led grief retreats for parents who had lost children. She looked into the eyes of the most devastated people on earth and said, without flinching, I know this darkness, and I'm still here. And somehow, impossibly, so are you. That kind of witness is priceless. It cannot be taught. It can only ever be lived. Back in Savannah's world, the cameras kept rolling. She had risen to co-anchor of the Today Show, one of the most coveted positions in American morning television. She had found love, married attorney Michael Feldman in 2014, and welcomed 2 beautiful children into her life. From the outside, the story looked complete, picture perfect, even. But in 2016, Savannah revealed something that reframed absolutely everything. She had been quietly losing her vision. A retinal detachment, and then complications, had left her with significant vision loss in one eye. She was facing the very real possibility of losing sight in the other. And here's the part that stops you cold. She kept anchoring. She kept showing up. She sat behind that familiar desk, delivered the news, interviewed world leaders, and almost no one watching at home knew that her world had quite literally begun to go dark. She underwent surgery. She prayed. She leaned deeply into her faith, a faith that, she would later say, had become the single most important thing in her life. Not the career, not the accolades, faith. And that shift, that quiet, seismic reordering of everything she valued, changed how she carried herself on screen. There was a new softness to her, a new depth, as though she had looked into the terrifying possibility of total loss and decided that what remained was more than enough. That's not a performance. That is transformation. What connects these two women most powerfully isn't the shared surname. It isn't coincidence or professional overlap. It's the thread of faith that runs through both of their stories like a lifeline pulled taut against a relentless current. Both Nancy and Savannah have spoken openly, vulnerably, about the role of belief in carrying them through the unsurvivable. And both have done something that takes enormous courage in public life. They've refused to keep that faith off screen. In a media landscape that often treats spirituality as something to quietly contain, both women pushed back simply by being honest. Nancy built an entire ministry around it. Savannah weaves it into interviews, into public reflections, into the way she speaks about her children, her fears, and her deepest hopes. It's never preachy. It's never performative. It's just real, and in a world drowning in carefully managed public images, real is genuinely revolutionary. There's a moment Savannah once described in an interview that has stayed with so many people. She talked about sitting in a hospital room, facing the full weight of uncertainty about her vision, and simply deciding to trust, not because she had answers, not because she had guarantees, but because the alternative, fear without any anchor, was unbearable. She chose trust as a deliberate act of will, and that choice, she said, changed everything. It didn't fix her eyes, but it fixed something far deeper inside her. Nancy Guthrie describes something remarkably similar. In the devastating aftermath of losing hope, she writes about a moment of absolute stillness, the kind that comes after the crying finally stops. The visitors leave, the casseroles run out, and the house goes quiet in a way that feels almost violent. In that stillness, she made a choice too. Not to be okay, she wasn't okay, but to believe that the story wasn't over, that even in the wreckage, something was being slowly built that she couldn't yet see. That belief became her life's work. Her books, Holding On to Hope, Hearing Jesus Speak Into Your Sorrow, What Grieving People Wish You Knew. They aren't cheerful self-help volumes. They are honest, unflinching companions for people standing in the darkest valleys of human experience. They don't promise that everything gets better. They promise something more essential, that you are not alone. And for someone sitting in unimaginable pain, that single promise is absolutely everything. She has sat with parents who lost children to cancer, to accidents, to the thousand terrible ways the world can crack open without any warning. She has looked them in the eyes and never once looked away. That unflinching presence, that willingness to stay in the room when the room is unbearable, is Nancy Guthrie's most profound and lasting gift, and it was born entirely from her own irreplaceable loss. Let's talk about something that rarely gets discussed when we celebrate successful women. The cost, not the professional cost. We talk about that often enough. The personal cost, the private cost, the years of uncertainty and self-doubt and quiet grief that never make it into any highlight reel. Because there's no camera rolling when you're sitting alone in your car in a parking lot, unable to go inside. Because today is simply just too hard. Savannah Guthrie has spoken openly about the long road to motherhood, the years of quietly wondering if it would ever happen, the fragility of hope when it's held just a little too tightly. She became a mother later in life, Vale in 2014, Charlie in 2016, and she has described that experience with a gratitude so fierce. It almost sounds like grief in reverse, like someone who knows, deep in their bones, exactly what it would have meant to never have this. That knowledge changes how you hold the people you love. It makes you careful, tender, and deeply, viscerally present in every moment. And her battle with vision loss added a whole other layer entirely. Here was a woman whose entire career depended on seeing the teleprompter, reading her guests, feeling the room, and the room was slowly going dark. The vulnerability of that, in a profession that rewards perfection and quietly punishes fragility, must have been absolutely terrifying. She chose transparency anyway. She told her story, and in doing so, she gave permission to millions of people watching to finally name their own silent, hidden fears. Nancy Guthrie's triumphs are quieter than Savannah's, but they are no less extraordinary. She didn't rebuild her life in front of cameras. She rebuilt it one conversation, one book, one grief retreat at a time. She and David chose, after losing 2 children, to remain together, and that choice isn't as automatic as it sounds, because grief is one of the most powerful forces in existence, capable of tearing a marriage completely apart. In the rubble of the worst thing imaginable, they looked at each other and chose each other again. And what emerged from that choice was a genuine partnership of purpose. They lead retreats together. They speak together. They have built something extraordinary out of the worst thing that ever happened to them. And that something has quietly reached into the darkest corners of other people's lives and left a steady light burning behind. There's a word for that kind of resilience, but the English language doesn't quite have it. It's not strength, because strength implies that you didn't break. These women broke. They broke completely and openly. What they carry now is something different, something that only exists on the other side of breaking. A kind of wholeness that contains every fracture, wears them openly, and says, "This happened, and I am still here, and the here still deeply matters." That is the shocking truth this story promised. Not a scandal, not a secret, something far more surprising than either of those things. 2 women who should, by any reasonable measure, have been diminished by what life handed them, and who instead became larger, more present, more fully, completely themselves. If something in this story moved you, sit with that feeling for just a moment. Don't rush past it, because the reason stories like Nancy's and Savannah's reach inside us and quietly rearrange something is that they're holding up a mirror. They're showing us what becomes possible when the very worst happens. Not the Hollywood version, the real version. The one where you don't have all the answers, where the grief is real, where the fear is real, and you choose to keep going anyway. That's the story worth telling. That's the story genuinely worth watching. If you've been carrying something heavy lately, a loss, a lingering fear, an uncertainty that simply won't quiet down, maybe today is the day you let someone else's story remind you that you are not as alone as it feels, that people have stood exactly where you're standing right now, and they found their way forward. Share this video with someone who needs it today. Leave a comment below. We read every single one. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, subscribe, because we are just getting started. The most powerful stories are always the ones that remind us we're beautifully, imperfectly human. And those stories, we will never stop telling them.